Welcome and thank you for joining us today. In order to maintain focus on the speakers, all participants' mics and videos have been turned off. Please remember to have a candle and something to light it with nearby for the candlelight vigil portion of the program. At this time, I'm going to turn over the call to Joe Berman, ADL New England's Regional Board Chair, to offer some opening remarks.
Thank you, Nora, and welcome to all of you on the line. I hope that everyone is well, and that you and your families continue to stay healthy and safe. Your presence today to recognize Holocaust Remembrance Day, known as Yom HaShoah, is an important message to all that we remember and bear witness to the lives and dreams lost in the genocide. Since the founding of ADL in 1913, ADL has been at the forefront of fighting anti-Semitism. An important part of our work is remembering how stereotyping and scapegoating led to the atrocities of the Holocaust. 6 million Jews and millions of others were dehumanized and murdered during this dark time in history. As we honor their memories today, we must understand that to fight one form of hate, we must fight all forms of hate. This premise is at the center of ADL's work, and today's webinar reflects that. I would be remiss not to note that yesterday, April 7th, marked the 27th year since the Rwandan genocide, a somber reminder that saying never again is not enough. Our actions must match our thoughts, and we must work together to combat all genocides everywhere. I'm now going to turn the call over to Robert Treston, ADL's New England's Regional Director, who will offer some brief remarks, lead us in a candle lighting vigil, and introduce Sylvia Ruth Gutmann, author, speaker, and Holocaust survivor, who will share her story with us. Robert?
Thank you, Joe, and thank you to our speakers and to everyone on the line for being with us today. I want to provide a roadmap for today's program. We will begin with a candle lighting ceremony, and then we're honored to have Sylvia Ruth Gutmann share her story. High school students Zach Gordon, Rebecca John Faza from the Noble and Greenbow School in Dedham, Massachusetts, and Mary Ratliff from Sanborn Regional High School in Kingston, New Hampshire will then have an opportunity to ask Sylvia some questions. At the end of the program, educators Michael Denning and Ashley Harbaugh will have an opportunity to share their experiences bringing Holocaust education directly into the classroom. Today, we mourn the loss of 6 million Jews and millions of others murdered in the Holocaust. Millions of lives lost, dreams destroyed, families torn apart, and flames extinguished. Mary, Zach, Rebecca, please turn on your cameras and join me in a candle lighting ceremony to pay homage to the victims of this dark time in our history. Together, we will light a candle while Mary reads a statement in memory of the children who lost their lives in the Holocaust. For those of you watching, I invite you to join us in lighting the candle. After all the candles are lit, we will hold for a moment of silence.
In memory of the 1.5 million children who were not allowed to grow up.
Please hold for a moment of silence. Thank you. I'm now honored to introduce Sylvia Ruth Gutmann, author, speaker, and Holocaust survivor. Sylvia was born in 1939 in Antwerp, Belgium, where her parents had fled to from Berlin. Sylvia lived as a hidden child in Europe until she was 7, and then lived in New York City, San Diego, Dallas, and Berlin, Germany. She now lives in Framingham, Massachusetts. Sylvia, thank you for being with us today and for being willing to share your story publicly. I would like to turn all of our attention now directly over to you for a few moments so you can share your story with us. Sylvia?
Thank you, Robert. Thank you to everybody here that I can't see and those I can see. I'll start at the beginning and then the middle and then the end. 20 minutes of a life. Like Robert said, I was born in Antwerp, Belgium on May 5th, 1939. My parents, as Robert also said, had fled there after Kristallnacht, or the night of the broken glass. My father was a salesman. My mother was a housewife. And we lived in Antwerp I don't remember because I was 1 year old when we fled Antwerp. Hitler had bombed Belgium at that point, and we had to flee again. And this time, because Papa had heard a rumor that if we could get to the south of France, we could hire a guide, one of the townspeople, and he or she would take us over the Pyrenees Mountains into Spain. And although Franco was a fascist government, he did open his borders to fleeing Jews. It's 1942. I'm 3 years old. My sister Rita is 10. My sister Susie is 9. Mama is 34. Papa is 42. There's a knock on the door. It is the French police. The Vichy government had collaborated with the Nazi regime, and they had come to arrest us. We lived on the top floor of Madame Bouhot's house, all 5 of us in one room. Madeline opened the door. She was 13 years old at the time. And they asked for the family Gutmann. Mama came to the door. Her 3 little girls are standing beside her, and my father is bedridden, very ill. As my father is crying from his bed, "Please don't take my family," they let out a loud laugh, the 2 gendarmes, and tell him that they promise they will come back for him later. My mother picks me up, my arms around her neck, and they march us down to the town square. The buses are lined up. All the Jewish men and women and children who had been hiding in this small village called Nye had been rounded up. The guard that was supposed to, the townsperson that my father had found to take us over the mountain, had looked at me and refused and saying that I was too young. It was too dangerous. We got on the bus and my mother looked out the window. There was no air. She kept saying no air, no Luft. And she noticed that my father somehow had crawled down to the village square and was hiding behind a tree. And she whispered in that kind of whisper speak, "Go back, go back." The train tracks led right into the camp. It was called Camp Reversalt. It had been a military camp and now was housing foreign-born Jews, gypsies, and they separated Mama from her children. We slept on straw-filled floors with lice. There were no furniture. There was no sanitary anything. The outhouse was just some wooden plank with holes. We got 1 cup of rotten tomato soup once a day with a slice of hard brown bread. It's early August. And very early in the morning, it was still dark out. Mama came into our barrack. "I must get you dressed, little ones. There will be a roll call." She dressed me. She left before us, and we got out to the square. It's the size of 2 football fields. There are lines of people, lines of children. There are long tables. Citizens of Reversalt are sitting behind the table and they are looking at lists. One of the French guards is shouting through his megaphone, "When your name is called, step out from the line with your tiny little bundles and walk to the end of the square." They call my mother, Malka Gutmann. My beautiful red-haired mother with green eyes, alabaster skin, steps out from the square, from the line, and looks at her 3 little girls. "Go back to the barrack, my darlings. I will be back soon." I run from the line. "Mama, Mama, take me," I'm screaming. "Take me." Suddenly, there are 2 of the guards holding me back and holding Mama back. And she looks at her daughter, Rita, who is 10 years old, and she says in German, "Promise me, Rita, you will take care of the baby." They rush her onto a cattle car. No windows, no food, just a pot in the middle for sanitary reasons. And 4 days later, my beautiful mother is gassed in Auschwitz. 6 months later, they will find my father, who is in hiding in Aubon. And he also will perish in the gas chamber in 1943. Their only crime, they were Jews. My sister was my surrogate mother, my storyteller. We came to America in 1946. I was 7 years old. Rita was 14. Susie was 13. On a ship that smelled. People were crying and screaming in different languages I did not understand. And that is my first memory. Seeing the Statue of Liberty, that great lady. I lived with my uncle and aunt. I called him Daddy Sam right away. I loved him. They lived in Washington Heights on Fort Washington Avenue. My sister also lived there with me. My sister Susie went to an aunt 10 blocks away. Daddy Sam owned a fur salon and was only home one day a week. He worked long and hard. My Aunt Gertie was mean. I think she was overwhelmed, but I didn't know that as a child. And she punished me. She screamed at me a lot. And she made me feel unwelcomed and that I was a burden. I'm 62 years old. When I fly on December 11th to Berlin, Germany. I'd always known how my parents died, but I wanted to know how they lived. It was 2001. I rented a small apartment and I decided that I would stay. Here was the country that I had feared, and here I was with the people that I had loathed. I began to tell my story. I spoke no German, so it had to be English. And I told my story to hundreds of young students. And what happened was that they opened their hearts to me. I had gone with such hate. And they showed me so much love. I found the house where my parents lived. It is a beautiful house in Prenzlauer Berg, which reminded me of walking through Soho or Greenwich Village. Today, there are 2 brass-plated stones in the sidewalk. Here lived Malka and Nathan Gutmann. The year they were born, the year they fled, 1938, murdered in Auschwitz. I found the house, although it had been, that neighborhood was bombed by the Allies, where my grandparents had lived. I never knew my grandparents. I have no memory of the first 7 years of my life. And I found the house, although it's a new house, but it's the same address where my grandparents lived. Both sets of my grandparents had been sent back to Poland, and Poland didn't want them. So they went to no man's land and they starved to death, or they were shot and thrown in a ditch. In 2005, I fly to Paris to meet the woman. I'm sorry, that was 1995, to meet the woman called Mademoiselle Rothschild. She had taken us out of the camp and brought us to a safe house. It was like a barn. She told us to call her mama. And one morning, 3 people came with bicycles wearing masks. And they said, "We were taking you to Switzerland." They left us at the border, 3 little girls alone, where Papa had instructed her to make sure that we could get to Switzerland, where he had a sister. And I held this 76-year-old woman in my arms. And I thanked her for saving my life. And she looked out the window and she said, "Why are you crying? The sun is shining." And then she said, "I only did my duty. What was happening was wrong." And in 2007, I am in Israel. And I'm knocking on the door of one Liesel Hanau. I had always wondered, how was it possible that the Vichy guards at the camp would not have shipped us with Mama? 250 children were shipped that day my mother left, would perish in Auschwitz. And my sister always told me, well, maybe they felt sorry, but that was not to be believed. They had no sympathy for these foreign-born Jews and these gypsies. They were actually paid per person you put on a cattle car. And I am thanking Liesel Hanau, and she tells me the story. Every night, she would go into the barracks of the adults and beg them. She was a nurse in the camp, 18 years old. And she would beg them not to take your children. Leave them with me. I will keep them safe until you come back. And Mama left us with a stranger. And every time I tell this story, I know that she's up there. And I know that she hears, and I want her to be proud. And I want to thank her for that selfless sacrifice, leaving her children with a stranger, trusting that we will be saved and that we will live. Life is such a gift. And every time I tell this story, if one person hears it with their heart, I too have saved a life. I have 20 minutes.
Thank you, Sylvia. I know that you placed all of us in the moment, and the yard site candle that will burn at my house for the next 25, 26 hours, I'm going to be thinking of your family and the story that you just told us. So we read so much and see movies, but you really put, at least I'm speaking for myself, and I think for everyone on this call, you placed us in the moment, just thinking about the straw and the smells and how you described the story. So I just want to thank you and let you know that you have a lot of support, and we are going to continue to tell this story and make sure that future generations and that the people that will come after all of us continue to know the story. So thank you. We're gonna move into the question section, and I'm gonna ask Mary, Rebecca, and Zach to turn their cameras on and to begin a conversation with Mary. And we're gonna start with Mary will go first.
So my first question is, you say anyone who listens to you becomes a witness. What should we be hearing as your witnesses, and what would you like us to learn?
I want you to learn the thing that I'd like you to take away from this story is the Holocaust started because of indifference and ignorance. And it behooves me to say that in 2021, there are people that feel that this never happened. And there are huge amounts of millennials that don't even know what Auschwitz is, or they have never heard of the Holocaust. So being a witness, because you did hear me today, I would want you to witness that anti-Semitism, racism, sexism, all the isms are wrong, and that you have to speak up. And this might be a burden for you, but you are my witness. And tell everyone that it did happen, that you saw the face of a child who had no grandparents, no parents, that this is wrong. This is wrong. And just know, as my witness, that you too can save a life, just with a smile, with a hand reached out. Tell them about my mama and my papa.
You said that the Holocaust has made you resilient and stronger and better able to meet the challenges of life. And we're curious, in what ways has this happened for you?
Quite frankly, yes, the Holocaust has made me resilient and stronger, and possibly better able to meet the challenges. And what, most importantly, what way this has happened for me is that I've learned that nothing is a given, that life or people or events should not be taken for granted. That I think most importantly, I've learned that we can overcome almost everything. Yeah. And that has made me I come from my heart, and I show sometimes how vulnerable I am, and that is my strength.
How did your experience affect your relationship with Judaism? And do you ever struggle to come to terms with the oppression you faced and its effect on your identity?
I have read this question many times, and I would like you to break it down for me a little bit, Zach, in terms of how did it affect my Judaism? How has that made me a better Jew, or a more
Has the role of Judaism in your life changed do you think it's changed as a result of being a survivor of the Holocaust?
Oh yes, most definitely. Yes, because I have experienced both evil and good. So the people that rescued me, and I only met 2, but it took 100 non-Jewish, some Jewish, some non-Jewish people to just say this, what was going on was wrong. And they were the good. So what really, I've always known I was a Jew. And having lived in New York, it's really easy to know that you're a Jew. But when I lived in Germany for 5 years, it is hard to be a Jew. There are not many, all the Jews that were saved never went back to Germany. So actually, it probably made me even more Jewish, more rooted in my Judaism. And I think that probably might answer that question. How did the oppression, being the Holocaust, and the loss, the enormous loss, and the trauma that I suffered as a result of that loss, I'm rooted in my Judaism. And quite frankly, I am also, it's the spiritual part of me as well as the religion part of me. Do I practice? Yes, maybe, but not, I'm not an Orthodox Jew. I am a very Reformed Jew. So Judaism is just where I live, where I live inside of me. And actually, I think it was the Holocaust that made me that way.
Why do you never say never again?
How could anyone, how could I? How could I explain Rwanda? How could I explain Bosnia? How could I explain Ethiopia? How could I explain somewhere in this world right now, today, at this moment, there are people killing other people because they are brown or black or seems to me that nobody has learned. No, never again does not apply. It would be wishful thinking. Because as long as people feel that they are better than another group of people, there will be genocide. Maybe on a smaller scale, but nevertheless, it will be genocide.
The next question is a question from the audience, and they say reports recently emerged of a local high school football team using the term Auschwitz and anti-Semitic language during a game. They were using these terms for their plays. And they're wondering, what would you want to tell these players about their use of these words? And what does this situation tell you about the state of Holocaust education today?
I'll answer the last one first. It pains me that having been in Berlin, I found out that Berlin actually, that Germany made it mandatory for Holocaust teaching. Unlike America. When I came to America, nobody wanted to hear my story. I grew up in the same kind of silence that I had to do in order to stay alive. Not enough schools teach the Holocaust. And that pains me a lot. It should be mandatory. As far as the Duxbury School, I would love to be there and speak to those students, because I believe that they didn't know. I would like to believe that they didn't know that the use of this language was disgraceful. I would like to believe that they didn't know anything about the Holocaust and Auschwitz. I would like to believe that. But if that is not true, then this makes it even more outrageous. And it makes it even more important to be taught in schools, all of them. Is that what you wanted to know?
Thank you.
It was shocking. It was shocking. I wept. Such carelessness.
Why do you think it is so difficult for those who are not directly affected by the Holocaust to connect to the experience?
I'm sorry, say that again, Zach.
Why do you think it is so difficult for those who are not directly affected by the Holocaust to connect it?
Well, because they don't know. So, you know, Holocaust survivors are dying a lot. And it is very hard to have people it's very difficult to just speak of 6 million people murdered in the Holocaust. It's hard to wrap your head around that number. So it's really important. You're important to hear me today, because I am just one face. I am the face of the Holocaust. I am the face of every child that was not allowed to live, to grow up, to become mothers and fathers and teachers and nurses and rock stars and lawyers. What do I want from your generation? You are my hope, actually. All the young people are my hope. That you will put more love in the world, that you will put more understanding in the world, that you will make changes, and that you will demand to be heard. Promise me you will do that. Promise me. Say it.
Promise you.
I promise you.
I promise you.
And we promise to keep telling this story, Sylvia. So I want to thank you for your strength, your resilience, and your courage, not just during the early part of your life, but the courage to speak today and to continue to tell this story. So thank you. You've really, I think, inspired all of us to take action in the face of injustice. And we take seriously your your wish for us to continue to be the witnesses. And we will take our lead from you. So thank you. You really, you've brought it to life for so many of us.
Yes.
And I want to thank Mary, Rebecca, and Zach for your thoughtful questions. I'll add earlier before we actually came onto the public program, Sylvia acknowledged the questions that they asked and prepared. So I just want to add to the compliments that Sylvia shared earlier off camera, for your thoughtfulness and your preparation, and also for your commitment to this issue. Before I pass the microphone to the educators that are with us, I just want to highlight that ADL has been advocating for legislation that would require students in public schools in Massachusetts to learn about the Holocaust and other genocides prior to high school graduation. I think we've gained some momentum in the aftermath of Duxbury, which we just talked about, and we want to encourage everyone that's here today to write to their state legislators, encouraging them to support this bill, and we will put some information in the chat. It's now my pleasure to introduce Michael Denning and Ashley Harble to share some of their learnings about bringing Holocaust education into the classroom. I'll just add one, and Sylvia, why don't you just share with everyone for one moment before we get to Ashley and Michael, who's in that photograph you're sharing.
My parents on their wedding day. And 13 years later, they would all be gas.
Well, thanks for bringing them into today's program. Michael and Ashley, if you want to just turn on your cameras, and I also just want to personally recognize Ashley. We sit on the State of New Hampshire Holocaust and Education Commission, and we have been charged with implementing what we're trying to get over the finish line in Massachusetts. Governor Sununu, New Hampshire, signed the bill into law in July. And a group of us have been working on this for the better part of almost a year now, I want to say, meeting monthly, and we're making incredible progress. And Ashley's a huge part of that. So thank you. All right, I will turn it over to Ashley and Mike.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Ashley Harble. I am an English teacher at Sanborn Regional High School in Kingston, New Hampshire. I've been an educator for 14 years and involved in Holocaust education for 14 years. At my school, I currently teach 9th grade English, where we're actually currently reading Night. And I saw a few of my 9th grade students are on this Zoom call, which is amazing. And thank you guys so much for joining us. And I also teach a Holocaust studies course, which is an elective for juniors and seniors, which Mary is a part of. And I just wanted to talk for a minute. Robert alluded to my work with the Holocaust and Genocide Education Commission in New Hampshire, just to stress the importance of Holocaust education. And Sylvia, I number one want to thank you for sharing your story with us, but I want to echo what you said, that the Holocaust really began with intolerance and ignorance. And I think that's really what our work as educators kind of tries to battle against and fight against. There is, like you said, so much hate still in our world today. And it's through educating our students that we have the best chance of battling that hatred. So I think what you shared with us is really powerful. And I always tell my students, and we kind of talk about that phrase, what it means to bear witness. I myself have been to Poland and Germany several times. I've been to Helmno and Treblinka and Auschwitz, and I share my story with them of what I've seen. And then we also have survivors who come and speak. But it's so important that they become the witnesses, that they can stand up against Holocaust denial, and that they also can recognize what led the hatred and intolerance and ignorance that led to the Holocaust, and recognize it in our world today and know how to stop it before it progresses to something so much bigger than what has happened in our past and what is happening in the world around us today. I do just want to quickly, before I turn it over to Michael, just also want to, my work with the commission has been really powerful and empowering. And for any educators that are on this call right now, just know this work is heavy and it is hard, but there are so many resources out there for you. The ADL is an amazing resource. Echoes and Reflections through the ADL has been such an amazing piece of my learning. I've done numerous conferences with them. I was on the advisory committee. I got to speak on behalf of them at NCTE. And also in New Hampshire, for those of you from New Hampshire or even Massachusetts, there's the Cohen Center at Keene State, which is a Holocaust and Genocide Study Center, which does amazing work and amazing programming. And just know that as an education community, we really need to step up and be there for each other, share resources with each other. So just know, if you are starting out, if you don't know where to begin, if you have questions about best practices or how to handle it, reach out to the ADL, reach out to the Cohen Center, or reach out to me and to Michael, and we are happy to share our knowledge with you, because this work is so incredibly important. And with that, Michael, I'll let you talk too.
Thank you, Ashley.
Michael, you're still muted.
Sorry about that, folks. Good afternoon. Thank you. Thank you, Ashley. My name is Michael Denning, and I'm head of upper school at Noble and Greeno School, the place where the amazing Rebecca Janfaza and Zach Gordon study. And it's my privilege to be their teacher. I'm also a career history teacher. And I've spent the better part of the last 3 decades trying to understand how the most educated country in the world to that date, arguably, could perpetrate such a horrific historical event that we now call the Holocaust, and we commemorate today on Yom HaShoah. I'm also been privileged the last several years to serve as on the advisory board of Facing History and Ourselves, another amazing resource in Holocaust education. And perhaps many of you have heard of their courses and the training of teachers that they do, but that's been really inspiring work for me, and the folks over there are incredible. And I in addition to being a teacher, and I talk to you today in that capacity, I'm also a student studying for a doctorate in Holocaust studies. I think the work that we're doing right now, as Ashley just said, is really hard, but it's actually never been more important. So what I thought I'd do is just offer you a few remarks on why Holocaust teaching is more important than ever. And I guess I want to start by just really a heartfelt thanks to Ms. Gutmann. Others have said it already, but it's important to say it again. Your courage and your strength, honesty, and wisdom, it's so inspiring and uplifting, and frankly, very motivating, for those of us. I do want to thank Rebecca, Mary, and Zach for your desire to know and understand, and for your important, thoughtful questions. And to Ashley, I echo what Robert just said, the work that you've done, not only for your students in your school, but also to bring Holocaust education to teachers and students and citizens across the state of New Hampshire is so important. And you can be sure I'm going to be calling you to see how you can help us out here in Massachusetts, because and there's a lot of work to be done. I'm so humbled and honored to be asked to stand together with Ms. Gutmann and these brilliant students, and Ashley and our friends at the ADL. These are folks who have long stood at the forefront of our fight against hate, racism, anti-Semitism, and other forms and acts of discrimination and injustice. And so thank you, Robert, and to Nora and Peggy and all the folks at ADL for the crucial work you do day in and day out to make our world more educated, safer, and better. And I know personally and professionally how amazing these folks are and how helpful they can be. So thank you. Today on Yom HaShoah, we pause to remember the 6 million Jews and 5 million other innocents as Sylvia talked about so eloquently, murdered by the Nazis and their collaborators. And as we do, we have to challenge each other to renew our dedication to teaching about the Holocaust. In a recent lecture, I heard renowned Holocaust historian Peter Hayes, some of you may know him from his amazing work, Why? But he reported that there are more than 16,000 volumes in the Library of Congress presenting research and knowledge on the Holocaust. That's a tremendous amount of work. Across Europe, there are memorials to the Holocaust and across the world, but certainly in Europe, most notably in Berlin and Auschwitz-Birkenau, where I've had the privilege to take students, and many other Nazi concentration camps. There are amazing museums of which we're all aware, including Israel's Yad Vashem and the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. They bring this horrific history and new research forward every day. And yet, recent research tells us that our country's citizens know less and less about what happened to the 6 million Jews, 40% of the world Jewry, and 5 million Sinti, Roma, disabled, and LGBTQS plus folks who perished during the Holocaust, humans who were murdered simply because of who they were. In a study last year sponsored by the Conference on Jewish Material Claims Against Germany, we learned that 11% of adults in the US and 22% of millennials have not heard or are not sure they've heard about the Holocaust. Ms. Gutmann referenced that in her remarks. 31% of US adults believe that 2 million or fewer Jews were killed during the Holocaust. Approximately half of all US adults cannot name a single concentration camp or ghetto. 41% of total US adults and 66% of millennials, as Ms. Gutmann said, could not identify what Auschwitz was. And over 80% of Americans have never visited a Holocaust memorial museum. Contemporaneously, a Pew Foundation study showed that fewer than half of Americans know that Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany through a democratic political process. In and of themselves, these studies are painful for the ways they show how soon we have forgotten those murdered, as well as the millions of other innocents whose lives were traumatically upended and irreparably damaged by the Holocaust. Don't we owe it to Ms. Gutmann, to her family, and to the millions of others whose communities, futures, and families were destroyed to keep their stories and memories alive? We have to teach better. We have to do better. Along with honoring the victims, there's another reason why we must teach about the Holocaust and what we talk about all the time at my school and what Ashley is leading across New Hampshire. Over the years, I've had the privilege, and it's an incredible privilege, to learn from several brave survivors like Ms. Gutmann. Along with their courage and resilience, what I've so admired about these folks is their love of humanity, and you heard that today, and their powerful commitment to making a better tomorrow. Indeed, to a person, the survivor educators I have worked with, such as Ms. Gutmann, Izzy Arbeiter, Rena Finder, they take the risk to tell the truth about what happened to them and those whom they love, because they hope in so doing, they will help future generations to make different choices than the ones made by the perpetrators and bystanders with whom they lived. Many historians of note will tell you that history does not repeat itself. And in a technical sense, they are right. No two events or periods are exactly the same. And as ADL Deputy National Director Kenneth Jacobson so aptly wrote this morning in honor of Yom HaShoah, the Holocaust was a uniquely horrific episode. But if we've learned anything from the vast interdisciplinary studies written on the Holocaust and genocide, it is that human civilizations across the ages are similar in their immense capacity for both love and hate. And when fear, hate, and ignorance coalesce, societies across time and place will do similarly terrible things, usually with little pushback from countless bystanders. So while we honor, commemorate, and teach about the 11 million who were murdered during the Holocaust, we must also teach about how Hitler came to power in a democratic republic, how he was propelled to power by a big lie and promises of how he would make Germany great again, how the Nazis used hate of Jews and others to bring people together, and how millions stood by while their neighbors were taken away. Democracies are fragile and survive only through the active and ethical participation of their citizens, the promise that Ms. Gutmann just asked us to make. Hatred of the other and violence are all too common in the human experience. In Nazi Germany in the 1930s and 40s, as well as in a Charleston church, in 2015, in an Orlando dance club in 2016, at a Pittsburgh synagogue in 2018, and in Atlanta and in Denver this past month. And these are just a few examples because, as Robert, Nora, and our friends at ADL will tell you, not a week goes by when they don't go to work against acts of ignorance, inhumanity, and injustice happening across our country, from here in New England to the US-Mexican border, and from coast to coast across this great continent. It is in honor of the victims of hate, past and contemporary, and for a more just, equitable, secure, and peaceful tomorrow that Ms. Gutmann, Ms. Finder, Mr. Arbeiter teach about the Holocaust. And so too must we. So thank you for listening. And thank you again, Ms. Gutmann, for your incredible inspiration.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. I'm actually going to ask the panelists who are still with us, I think almost everyone is, maybe you could just put your camera on just for the end. Mary, Rebecca, Joe, if you're still here. I'm going to ask Peggy Schuker from ADL and also Nora just to show everyone's face for just a closing moment here. And first, I just want to thank Michael for your leadership and your words. And Ashley, it continues to be an honor to work with you. And I just want to recognize that you're playing such a huge role. When I think back on what we heard from Sylvia, part of telling the story and part of protecting the future, you're doing it because you are the people in the classroom inspiring the students. And so, being a teacher is probably not, recognized and appreciated enough. So I just want to take a moment right now to do that and to say thank you. And for Mary, Rebecca, and I think Zach had to leave a few minutes early. I just want to thank you for not only the thoughtful questions and participating, but I know that you are engaged in it every single day. And so it's often not easy to be engaged in these discussions and sort of engage others. So I just want to thank you. And Sylvia, I just so appreciate, give you a virtual hug for sharing your story. And I've got, my candle here is burning, and I will be thinking about your parents and your family. And so I use this moment just to say, I'm so sorry for your loss. And I just want to thank our board chair, Joe Berman, Peggy, the deputy director in Boston, and Nora Cohen, the associate director in Boston. Peggy and Nora played a huge role in putting this together. Special thanks to Nora, who envisioned today's program and coordinated everything and made it all a reality. So thank you all for joining us. Stay safe and continue to be well. Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye.